Nobody on our crew expected to find a living person that Tuesday morning. The county had finally approved the demolition of St. Agnes Memorial Hospital after it had sat abandoned for almost 18 years. Broken windows, collapsed ceilings, hallways filled with dust and vines. Our job was simple. Walk through every floor one last time. Make sure nobody was inside. Then bring the entire building down. I'd done demolition work for nearly 25 years. Usually the biggest surprise was finding stray animals or teenagers looking for a thrill. That morning, it was something else entirely. My name isn't important. The story belongs to the man we found. All I can tell you is that if my foreman hadn't insisted we inspect every room one final time, there would have been a funeral instead of a rescue. We split into pairs. I headed toward the east wing carrying a flashlight. The silence inside the building felt unnatural. Even our footsteps sounded swallowed by the empty hallways. Paint peeled from every wall. Old wheelchairs sat overturned beneath broken ceiling tiles. Sunlight slipped through cracked windows, filling the air with floating dust. I reached what used to be the intensive care unit. Every room was empty, until I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was so faint I almost convinced myself it was loose metal moving in the wind. Then it came again. 3 slow knocks, always the same rhythm. I stopped walking. So you hear it too? My partner whispered. I nodded. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway. It was coming from behind a heavy steel fire door at the end of the corridor. The chain around the handles looked newer than everything else in the building. So did the padlock. None of it belonged there. We shouted through the door. "Is someone in there?" For several seconds, nothing. Then a weak voice answered. I thought nobody was coming. Every hair on my arm stood up. My partner immediately radioed the foreman. "Call 911. We've got someone alive." The fire department arrived less than 10 minutes later. Bolt cutters snapped the chain. The steel door groaned open. The smell that drifted out wasn't decay. It was damp concrete, mold, and stale air. A single emergency lantern flickered in the corner, an old folding chair, several empty water bottles, a blanket, and sitting against the wall, an elderly man so thin he looked like he'd disappeared into his own clothes. His beard was completely white. His hands trembled, but his eyes were wide open, almost as though he'd refused to let himself fall asleep. A paramedic knelt beside him. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" The old man smiled faintly. "My name," he paused to catch his breath, "is Arthur Bennett." The paramedic checked his pulse. "How long have you been here?" Arthur looked toward the broken window. "I stopped counting after the third sunrise." The room fell silent. 3 days. Someone had left him there for 3 days. Inside the ambulance, one of the deputies asked the obvious question. "Who brought you here?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. He stared through the rear doors as the abandoned hospital disappeared behind us. Finally, he spoke so quietly everyone leaned closer to hear him. "My son." No one said a word. "He told me we were driving to a private rehabilitation center." Arthur smiled bitterly. "I even thanked him." The deputy frowned. "What happened when you arrived?" Arthur closed his eyes. "My daughter-in-law walked ahead carrying my overnight bag. My son helped me inside. They sat me in a wheelchair. I thought they were signing admission papers. Instead, he looked down at his trembling hands. They locked the door. The ambulance became completely silent. My son looked through the little glass window. He smiled. Then Arthur repeated the sentence that had echoed inside his mind ever since. "You're just a bill. We can't afford any more." The deputy slowly lowered his notebook. "Why didn't you call for help?" Arthur reached into his shirt pocket. It was empty. My phone, my wallet, my medication. They took everything. He gave another tired smile. "They even took my wedding ring." "Why?" They said, "Dead men don't need jewelry." No one inside that ambulance knew what to say. 2 hours later, doctors confirmed Arthur was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from untreated heart disease. The physician quietly told him another 24 hours inside that abandoned hospital would have likely killed him. Arthur simply nodded. I figured as much. Late that afternoon, a detective entered Arthur's hospital room. "My name is Elena Ruiz. I'm going to ask you a difficult question." Arthur looked at her. "Go ahead. Do you know why your son abandoned you?" Arthur didn't hesitate. "Because I became expensive." "No." The detective gently slid a thin folder onto the bedside table. "I don't think that's the real reason." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" She opened the folder. Inside was a copy of a legal document. At the top, Arthur immediately recognized his own signature. or what looked like it. His face slowly lost all color. "I never signed this." Detective Ruse looked him directly in the eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." Arthur stared at the forged document, then whispered something that made everyone in the room stop writing. "If that's already been filed, then my son believes I'm never coming home." The first thing I asked the nurse after Detective Ruse left wasn't about my health. It wasn't about my son. It wasn't even about the document she'd placed on my bedside table. I asked for a mirror. The nurse looked surprised. "A mirror?" I nodded. She found a small one inside the bathroom and handed it to me. For a long time, I simply stared. The man looking back at me barely resembled the father I'd spent 79 years becoming. My beard was tangled. Dark circles surrounded my eyes. My cheeks had collapsed inward. 3 days. That's all it had taken. 3 days for my own son to convince himself I was already gone. I slowly placed the mirror on the bedside table. Then I looked at Detective Ruiz. "I'll tell you everything. My name is Arthur Bennett. Until 3 days ago, I believed my son still loved me. His name is Kevin. When he was little, he couldn't sleep unless I checked under his bed for monsters. When he learned to ride a bicycle, he scraped both knees and cried harder because he thought he'd disappointed me than because he was hurt. After his mother passed away, it was just the two of us. I worked double shifts repairing elevators, sometimes triple shifts, not because I wanted a bigger house, because Kevin deserved every opportunity I never had. I missed birthdays, worked Christmas mornings, skipped vacations, every overtime check paid for his future. Watching him graduate college remains one of the happiest days of my life. I remember thinking, everything had been worth it. I had no idea that years later, he'd begin measuring my life against a monthly medical bill. Things changed after Kevin married Melissa. At first, she seemed thoughtful. She brought groceries when I caught the flu, sent birthday cards, always called me Dad. Then, the conversations slowly changed. She began asking strange questions. "How much does your heart medication cost? Does Medicare pay for all of it? How often do you see specialists?" I answered because I thought she cared. I was wrong. She wasn't learning about my health. She was calculating my expense. One evening, about 6 months before everything happened, I accidentally overheard them arguing in their kitchen. Melissa slammed a drawer. "We can't keep doing this," Kevin answered quietly. "He's my father. He's also draining us. My salary covers most of it, barely." Then she said something I never forgot. "Sometimes love becomes too expensive." I stood outside the back door holding a pie I'd baked for Kevin's birthday. I never knocked. I quietly drove home instead. That was the first time I wondered whether I had become a burden. 3 months later, Kevin suggested I move into his house. "It'll be easier. You shouldn't be living alone." Part of me hesitated, but another part remembered the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides. I wanted to believe that boy was still there. So I agreed. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Then little things began disappearing. My checkbook, my spare house keys, the folder containing my insurance papers. Whenever I asked, Melissa always smiled. "You probably forgot where you put them." I started doubting myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe old age really was stealing my memory. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I returned from a doctor's appointment earlier than expected. The front door was slightly open. Inside, Kevin and Melissa were sitting at the dining room table. My financial records covered the entire surface. Bank statements, insurance policies, property tax documents, even my late wife's jewelry appraisal. Kevin looked up first. His face turned white. "Dad." Melissa quickly stacked the papers. "We were organizing things for you." "No," I quietly answered. "You were organizing them for yourselves." Neither of them denied it. That silence hurt more than any excuse could have. The following week I met with my attorney. Margaret Collins had handled my family's legal work for almost 20 years. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Arthur, if something happened to you tomorrow, would your current wishes still reflect your conscience?" I thought about Kevin, then about my granddaughter, Lily, 23 years old, elementary school teacher, the only person who still visited every Sunday without being asked. She never spoke about money, never asked about my property. She came because she enjoyed hearing stories about her grandmother. I smiled. "No, they wouldn't." Margaret nodded. "Then we'll change them." We scheduled the signing for the following Monday. I never told Kevin. I intended to explain everything afterward, face to face. father to son. I still believed honesty could repair what greed had broken. I underestimated how far desperation can push someone. The Friday before my appointment, Kevin knocked on my bedroom door. Dade, ready for what? The rehabilitation center. What rehabilitation center? The cardiologist recommended 2 weeks of physical therapy. I frowned. I don't remember that. He called while you were napping. Melissa appeared behind him carrying my overnight bag. I packed everything. I should have noticed something was wrong. She'd packed clothes, but none of my medication. I didn't realize it until much later. By then, the abandoned hospital was already behind us, and my son was smiling as he unlocked the front doors. The drive lasted almost 2 hours, at least. That's what it felt like. Kevin kept talking about the rehabilitation center. The doctors there are excellent. You'll have your own room. They specialize in heart patients. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Melissa hardly spoke. She spent most of the trip looking out the passenger window, occasionally checking her phone. Looking back, neither of them ever mentioned the name of the facility, not once. We eventually left the highway, then the paved road, then even the gravel disappeared. Trees surrounded us on every side. The farther we drove, the quieter Kevin became. I looked through the windshield. There isn't much traffic out here. He forced a smile. That's why patients recover faster. Something about that answer didn't sit right. Hospitals aren't built where nobody can find them. Finally, the car stopped in front of a massive brick building. Half the windows were boarded shut. The parking lot was cracked with weeds growing through the asphalt. An old emergency room sign hung crooked above the entrance. Several letters had fallen off years earlier. This doesn't look open. Kevin quickly climbed out. Melissa opened my door. Come on, Dad. I stayed where I was. I don't hear anyone. No ambulances, no nurses, no voices, only wind moving through broken windows. Kevin bent down beside me. You're nervous. That's normal. He helped me into my wheelchair before I could argue further. For a moment, I almost asked him to turn around. Instead, I trusted my son. That decision nearly cost me my life. Inside, the building smelled like damp concrete and mildew. Dust covered the reception desk. Leaves had blown through shattered windows. Every wheel of my chair echoed through empty hallways. I looked around. Where's the staff? Melissa answered without looking at me. They're expecting us upstairs. We never went upstairs. Instead, Kevin pushed me toward an old storage corridor near the back of the building. There were no patient rooms, only rusted doors, broken ceiling lights, peeling paint. My heartbeat began racing. Kevin, he stopped the wheelchair. What? I want to leave. He didn't answer. I looked over my shoulder. Melissa was standing behind us, blocking the hallway, holding my overnight bag. She slowly placed it on the floor, then stepped away from it. Kevin walked in front of me for a moment. He couldn't meet my eyes. Then he finally looked up. I'm sorry, Dad. For what? He swallowed hard. We can't do this anymore. Do what? Take care of you. I laughed nervously. What are you talking about? Melissa folded her arms. Your medications cost more every month. I stared at her. My medications, your home nurse, your specialists, your hospital visits. She spoke as if she were reading numbers from a spreadsheet. Every month there's another bill. Kevin rubbed both hands across his face. We're drowning. I looked at my son. If you need help, I have savings. I'll pay for everything. Melissa immediately shook her head. No, you don't. I frowned. What do you mean? She smiled. A month ago, Kevin became your financial power of attorney. The room suddenly felt smaller. What? You signed the paperwork? No, I signed authorization for my physical therapy. Kevin finally whispered. It was included. I felt the blood drain from my face. You tricked me. He didn't deny it. Melissa picked up my wallet from the overnight bag. She opened it, removed every bank card, every dollar, then dropped the empty wallet into my lap. She reached inside again. My phone. She switched it off, dropped it into her purse. Then, she pulled the wedding ring from my overnight bag, the ring I'd worn for 52 years. The only thing I'd never taken off after my wife died. I reached for it. Melissa, she slipped it into her own pocket. You won't be needing this. My voice cracked. That belonged to Kevin's mother. She looked at me without the slightest hint of guilt. It'll pay for next month's mortgage. Kevin unlocked a heavy steel fire door. Behind it, a small storage room, one dusty mattress, a folding chair, several cases of bottled water, a flashlight, nothing else. I looked back at him. You planned this? He slowly nodded. Weeks, maybe months. Every bottle of water, every blanket, every detail planned. I couldn't understand how the little boy who once cried after accidentally stepping on a bird had become the man standing in front of me. "Kevin, please." He looked away. "I can't." "You can." "No," his shoulders trembled. "If I don't, Melissa leaves." I almost couldn't believe what I'd heard. "So you're choosing your marriage over your father?" He whispered something so quietly I barely heard it. "I'm choosing survival." Melissa laughed. "No," she corrected him. "We're choosing our future." Then she looked directly at me, cold, expressionless. "You're just a bill. We can't afford any more." Kevin slowly backed into the hallway. "I'm sorry." The steel door began closing. I pushed my wheelchair forward. "Kevin!" He wouldn't look at me. "Kevin!" The door slammed shut. Metal echoed through the empty building. Then, I heard the chain being wrapped around the handles. The padlock clicked. One final time. I rolled toward the tiny wired glass window in the door. Kevin was still standing there. For one brief second, I thought he might unlock it. Instead, Melissa took his hand, led him away, and without ever looking back, they disappeared down the empty hallway, leaving me completely alone. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes, maybe 20. I noticed something lying beneath the old mattress, a faded leather folder covered in dust. I pulled it out. Across the front, 3 words were still barely visible. St. Anne's Memorial Hospital Foundation. Inside was a document that changed everything. Not because it explained why my son left me there, but because it revealed exactly who actually owned the abandoned hospital. And the name on that paper was one Kevin Bennett had never seen before. For several minutes, I simply stared at the folder in my hands. Dust covered the faded leather. The paper inside had yellowed with age. Most of it looked like ordinary legal paperwork, old construction permits, property surveys, maintenance contracts. Then I reached the final page. I read the first paragraph once, then again. My hands started shaking, not because I was afraid, because I suddenly understood why the building had never been sold. 24 years earlier, the St. Agnes Memorial Hospital Foundation had transferred ownership of the property into a permanent charitable trust. The trust existed for one reason. If the hospital ever reopened as a community medical center, every acre of surrounding land would automatically become part of the foundation. The chairman of that foundation was my late wife, Eleanor Bennett. After her death, the position transferred to me. I had completely forgotten about it. The trust had no cash left, no employees, no active hospital, so it had disappeared from my mind. But legally, I was still its chairman, which meant something even more important. No one could sell the land without my written approval. Not my son, not the county, not a developer.
No one.
Suddenly, everything made sense. Kevin hadn't abandoned me because my medications were expensive. That was only the excuse. Months earlier, a developer had announced plans to purchase nearly 50 acres surrounding the abandoned hospital. The project included luxury apartments, shopping centers, and medical offices. The newspapers estimated the deal at over $60 million. Kevin must have discovered the forgotten trust. He believed if I disappeared, my estate would pass directly to him. As my legal heir, he planned to dissolve the trust, approve the sale, and collect millions. He never imagined I'd survive long enough to stop him. Back in the hospital, Detective Ruiz listened without interrupting. When I finished, she immediately called the county recorder's office. An hour later, she returned carrying another file. "You were right. The trust still exists." She looked directly at me. "And according to state records, you're still the only person authorized to approve any transfer of that property." For the first time since my rescue, I smiled, not because of the money, because I finally understood the truth. Kevin hadn't abandoned his father. He had tried to erase the last obstacle standing between himself and a fortune. 3 days later, the newspapers reported my rescue. Every television station carried the story. Within hours, the district attorney issued arrest warrants for Kevin and Melissa. They weren't arrested at home. They weren't arrested at the airport. They were arrested inside the office of the same developer, preparing contracts to purchase the hospital property. They had already started celebrating. The contracts still sat on the conference room table when detectives walked in. A month later, Kevin finally saw me again. Not in my living room, not in a hospital. Across a courtroom, he looked older, tired. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor placed photographs before the jury. The chained door, the storage room, the mattress, the empty medication bottles. Then they played security footage from a gas station 30 miles away. It showed Kevin buying chains, Padlocks, flashlights, cases of bottled water, 3 days before abandoning me. The jury watched in complete silence. Every excuse disappeared. This hadn't been panic, it had been planning. When the judge asked if I wished to make a victim impact statement, I stood slowly, looked directly at my son, then spoke calmly. Kevin, when you were 6 years old, you climbed into my bed during every thunderstorm because you believed I could protect you. I spent my whole life trying. I never imagined the day would come when I'd need protection from you. He lowered his head, his shoulders shook, but I saw no tears, only regret that he'd failed, not regret for what he'd done. The jury found Kevin guilty of attempted murder, kidnapping, fraud, elder exploitation, and conspiracy. Melissa was convicted on every count as well. Both received lengthy prison sentences. Neither inherited a single dollar. 6 weeks later, I met with my attorney, not to change my will, to change my legacy. The Forgotten Hospital Trust remained in my hands. Instead of approving the sale, I partnered with a non-profit medical foundation. Together we restored part of the old building, not into another luxury development, into a free community health clinic for seniors who couldn't afford treatment. The first plaque placed near the entrance didn't carry my name. It carried Eleanor's, because she had always believed healthcare should never depend on someone's bank account. On opening day, the demolition crew returned, not carrying wrecking equipment, carrying flowers. The foreman smiled. Never thought we'd help open a hospital. I laughed. Neither did I. Then I looked toward the entrance. Dozens of elderly people were already waiting for appointments. Some leaned on walkers. Some held grandchildren's hands. Every one of them walked through doors my son intended to seal forever. A young reporter asked me one final question. Mr. Bennett, after everything your son did, what's the greatest revenge? I looked at the clinic behind me, then answered without hesitation. My son abandoned me in a place meant to save lives. I made sure it would. The reporter lowered her microphone. She didn't ask another question. She didn't have to. The building that was supposed to become my grave had become the place where thousands of people would find hope. And that was something Kevin could never take away.